Hello dear colleagues, my name is Alexey Alexeyev. I'm an adjunct professor in the Department of Classics and Religious Studies, University of Ottawa. Welcome to my presentation. Glancing back, looking forward. Prototype-Type-Metatype in Roman numismatic Aegidophoric portraiture. One of the most impressive examples of Roman imperial numismatic propaganda is the heroic type portraying a resolute emperor with dignified laureate head, confident leftward profile, and naked upper torso seen from the rear. The sitter is depicted with his left shoulder covered by an elaborate classical aegis and his back crossed by a balteus, sword belt. The obliquely protruding spear reinforces the general leftward thrust of the composition. The original models for this type were the Antonine emperors and co-rulers Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. In or around 173 CE, the former was portrayed on the obverse of a splendid bronze medallion, exquisitely designed and skillfully executed by a superb master engraver. Interesting detail. In his monumental work on Roman medallions, Francesco Gnecci indicates that Lucius Verus was pictured in a manner very similar to his adoptive brother Marcus Aurelius, but without a spear. At least Gnecci doesn't mention the spear in the plate's description. Unfortunately, the illustration's poor quality doesn't allow us to evaluate the accuracy of this account with any confidence. However, on the reverses of both medallions, the co-emperors are depicted holding spears, Marcus Aurelius in his right hand and Lucius Verus in his left. What were the Antonine heroic Aegidophoric types likely iconographic prototypes? What numismatic types can be considered as the associated metatypes? In other words, the later creative elaboration of this type. What place does this type occupy in the evolution of Roman heroic numismatic portraiture? I've identified this type's 8 major iconographic features, which allow comparisons with the related antecedent and descendant numismatic types, and the determination of possible prototype-type-metatype relations. They are the left shoulder aegis with a serpent stream, the Gorgonian, a bearded face with cranial wings, most likely Phobos, the personification of battle fear and panic, a spear, the sitter's confident leftward profile, a laurel wreath, the balteus, and last but not least, a nude, heroic upper torso seen from the rear. Several regional artistic traditions, from Hellenistic Greco-Bactria and Cimmerian Bosporus to Middle-Late Republican and early Imperial Rome, contributed artifacts with iconographic expressions that can be considered prototypical to the type in question. In the numismatic domain, Eucratides I laid the foundations by introducing the type of heroic nude bust, including the view from the rear, and the spear, in this case brandished. Eucratides's younger contemporary Menander I elaborated the design by adding, crucially, a left shoulder aegis. The reverse of this type featured Athena Alcidemus, carrying a shield aegis and brandishing a thunderbolt. Notably, the goddess was also pictured seen from the rear. On the majority of Aegidophoric type coins, Menander appears diademed and without a helmet. From the 130s to the 80s BCE, a succession of Indo-Greek rulers followed suit, and issued coins with their depictions in the heroic Aegidophoric manner. Among them there were Antiochidas Nikephoros, Strato I Dicaius, Philoxenus Anicetus, Diomedes Soter, Amintas Nicator, Heliocles II Dicaius, Menander II Dicaius, Archebius Dicaius Nikephoros, and Artemidorus Anicetus. Almost simultaneously, just slightly later, from 112 to 53 BCE, several Roman Republican monarchs produced coinages with the heroic, that is, viewed from the rear, depictions of gods and heroes. Among them, there were the thunderbolt-brandishing male deity, variously identified as Viovis or Apollo, helmeted Mars with the Balteus and the spear, Roma, also helmeted and with a spear, and Hercules, draped with a lion skin and holding his emblematic club. Later on, this tradition was extended to the Roman provincial issues, with the representations of thunderbolt brandishing Jupiter, helmeted Ares with the Balteus, Perseus with the Harpa, Poseidon with the trident, Artemis with the bow and arrows, and even Asclepius with his characteristic serpent and twine rod. The heroic portrayal of a laureate emperor, showing the seater's exposed upper back with the prominent trapezius muscle, became a common feature on Roman imperial coinage starting with Augustus. The Augustan Roman provincial issues faithfully followed this iconographic convention. The heroic portraiture approach was replicated by the succeeding Julio-Claudians, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. The tradition continued throughout the tumultuous year of the four emperors, as we can see from the coins with portraits of Galba, Otto, and Vitellius. The Flavians followed suit, as evident from the coinages of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. The five good emperors carried on with the tradition. The emperor portrayed as a heroic laureate appears on coins of Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Lucius Verus diligently followed the established convention. Now let's turn our attention to another essential iconographic component, the aegis. Emperor Nero introduced Aegidophoric portraiture to the Roman numismatic repertoire. Nero, wearing the left shoulder or neck aegis, appeared on coins minted in Rome, Antioch, and Alexandria. Among the subsequent Aegidophoric emperors, there were Galba, Vespasian, Titus, Domitian, and Nerva. Emperor Trajan introduced the Aegidophoric coin type, which can be seen as a much simplified version of the later Aurelian type. Most notably, it lacks the spear and the Phobos' head. Trajan's minters produced an array of coin types in different materials that featured the heroic laureate bust with the left shoulder aegis. Trajan was also the first to deploy a combination of aegis and balteus. In regard to the aegis, Hadrian generally adhered to the design guidelines established by Trajan. This applies to the generic Aegidophoric type, as well as to the aegis-Balteus combination. Antoninus Pius followed his predecessors, as this medallion minted in Rome testifies. The shoulder aegis is a common feature of Antoninus's imperial as well as provincial coinages. The Aegidophoric iconography of Lucius Verus was limited to one standard type. It was replicated on the gold aurei, silver denarii, and bronze sestertii. And finally, Marcus Aurelius. His depiction as wearing an aegis appeared early in his career, even before he became emperor. In the early 140s, Antoninus Pius issued sestertii featuring the laureate emperor on the obverse, and young Caesar wearing the left shoulder aegis on the reverse. Eventually, in the late 40s and early 50s, the Aegidophoric portraits of Caesar Marcus Aurelius migrated to the coin's obverses. After becoming an emperor in 161, Marcus Aurelius continued the trend, but now appearing crowned with a laurel wreath. Provincial issues of Alexandria mirrored this iconographic tendency. Now let's look to the final piece of the puzzle, the spear. Before the early 130s, Roman emperors were never depicted with a spear on coins. The protruding spear in front of the regal citer appears for the first time on the coins of Bosporan king Cotys II, picturing Hadrian. Antoninus Pius was portrayed in a similar fashion on the coins of Rhoemetalcus and Eupator. In 167-68 CE, that is 5 years prior to the medallion at the center of our attention, produced around 173, Bosporan king Tiberius Julius Eupator minted gold statues depicting laureate Marcus Aurelius with a protruding spear. As far as the available numismatic material informs us, King Eupator never issued coins with individual portraits of Lucius Verus. Perhaps that was a reflection of his less senior position in the imperial co-ruling arrangement. However, double portraits of Lucius Verus together with Marcus Aurelius regularly appeared in the 160s. Interestingly, some of them featured a spear placed vertically between the two emperors. Two rulers, one spear. That could be an important clue to the interpretation of the apparently spearless depiction of Lucius Verus on the medallion mentioned in the beginning of this presentation. Now it's time to summarize the preliminary findings related to the search for the Antonine heroic Aegidophoric type's possible prototypes. A comprehensive review of the antecedent numismatic material did not identify any coin types that could be considered as direct prototypes of the type in question. However, the numerous collateral prototypes, those which are indirect or pertain to isolated iconographic components, should be mentioned. Among them there are the laureate head, ubiquitous on Roman coinage, starting with Augustus; the heroic bust, nude upper torso seen from the rear, starting with Eucratides; the left shoulder aegis, starting with Menander I; the Balteus, starting with Trajan; and the protruding spear, starting with Cotys II and Hadrian. This acknowledgement requires the extension of the search outside of the numismatic material, and the closest artistic field is the Glyptics, the art of gemstone carving. Even a brief review of the most famous masterpieces of ancient Glyptic art immediately provides encouraging indications. This magnificent specimen, known as the Gonzaga Cameo, from the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, features the royal couple. The male sitter wears a scaly aegis with a serpent stream, prominent gorgonion, and, importantly, bearded phobos with cranial wings. This particular design component was completely absent in the reviewed numismatic material. This gem, from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, portrays King Perseus of Macedon. He also wears an aegis, and in a more aggressive attitude brandishes a spear, very much like the Hellenistic rulers on the coinages of Greek Bactria and India. The Blacas cameo from the British Museum, depicting deified Augustus, provides an iconographic parallel that is closest so far to Marcus Aurelius's medallion. All crucial components are present, from the heroic attitude to the spear and Phobos's head. However, the closest extant analogy is a gem from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, dated to the 40s or 50s CE. It also portrays heroic Augustus, and in terms of the overall composition and rendering of its particular components, it can be considered as prototypal to the type in question. I would also mention two other first-century specimens with similar iconography. A miniature glass-paste gem from London, depicting Aegidophoric Tiberius, and similar in size, an amethyst gem by Scylax, portraying Claudius, from St. Petersburg. Now let's turn our attention to the post-173 numismatic descendants. In 177, Marcus Aurelius issued another medallion, the obverse of which was practically identical to that of 173. But this time, the medallion's reverse depicted the two emperors driving a triumphal quadriga. The occasion was the celebration of Commodus's appointment as co-ruling emperor. In 186, now as the sole ruler, Commodus issued a medallion with the reverse featuring an emperor driving a quadriga alone. The obverse can be considered a direct metatype of the Aurelian prototype. The only difference between the two is the appearance of Commodus's face instead of his late father's. Next was Septimius Severus, with bronze coins minted in Apollonia. His son and for a time co-emperor Caracalla was pictured in the heroic Aegidophoric attitude in 207. Caracalla's provincial issues mirrored the Metropolitan Convention, but notably not including the spear. This type can be considered as the first in the line of collateral heroic Aegidophoric metatypes. The tradition was extended by the later Severan emperors, Elagabalus and Severus Alexander. The latter initiated some sort of experimentation with the type, introducing a simplified rendering of the aegis and substituting a laurel wreath with a radiate crown. The radiate crown was a feature on the Mediolanum Antoniniani of Gallienus and Claudius Gothicus. Tacitus's minters in Ticinum and Serdica followed suit. Probus provided the last flourishing of the classical heroic Aegidophoric type, as this splendid gold aureus minted in Rome demonstrates. His coinages featured a variety of aegis designs, as well as an assortment of headgear, from the traditional laurel wreath to the radiate crown and the crested helmet. Maximian Herculius was the last emperor portrayed in the heroic Aegidophoric attitude. The Antonine heroic Aegidophoric type inspired the alternative Aspidophoric type, wherein the aegis was substituted with a round shield, aspis. This numismatic metatype was introduced by Septimius Severus and was produced in Rome, as well as in the provinces. This type was replicated on coinages of numerous successors, including Caracalla, Elagabalus, Maximus, Gallienus, Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, Probus, Constantius Chlorus, and Maxentius. The type's final, most spectacular flourishing occurred during Crispus's tenure as Caesar. The Aspidophoric heroic type appeared on the gold solidi minted in Antioch, Aquileia, Ticinum, Sirmium, Thessalonica, Cyzicus, and Nicomedia. This metatype's variant with the cuirassed and dressed sitter became very popular during Caracalla's reign. Its production was concentrated chiefly in the provincial mints. The type was replicated on coinages of many succeeding generations of rulers. The late Severans, Elagabalus and Severus Alexander, the emperors during the crisis of the 3rd century, for example Philip the Arab, Valerian and Gallienus, the Constantinians, Constantine the Great and Crispus, and the later Valentinianic emperors. A comprehensive review of the antecedent numismatic material did not identify any coin types that could be considered as a direct prototypes of the Antonine heroic Aegidophoric type. However, numerous collateral heroic prototypes emerged from the Greco-Bactrian, Indo-Greek, Roman, and Bosporan coinages. The direct prototypes are found in the Julio-Claudian Glyptic art, specifically among the carved gems portraying deified Augustus. The Antonine heroic Aegidophoric type was replicated on coinages of numerous successors, thus constituting lineages of direct and collateral metatypes. The Antonine type also inspired the development of the collateral heroic Aspidophoric metatype, which in turn evolved into two parallel lineages: the primary, with the nude torso, and secondary, with the dressed torso. The Antonine heroic Aegidophoric type's impressive retrograde and anterograde connections of lineage determine its very important place and pivotal role in the history of Roman numismatic portraiture. Thank you.